everyone. My name is Brett and I'm in the honors portion of this class. The prompt I decided to do for the honors presentation is Cooking with Ovid, Authentic Roman Meals based on one or more of his stories. Um, I decided to bake something similar to what we think of cheesecake today called libum. Okay, so first getting into what libum is. To begin with, here are a couple pictures of what libum could possibly look at depending on the recipe you're using. I looked at a lot of different recipes and it seemed like there is a lot of variety in how thick you can make it, how thin you can make it, and different versions of ingredients. Um, in general, similar to what I've said, it is kind of what we think of as a cheesecake because all of the recipes include some sort of soft cheese and flour. So you're basically just making like a cheesy bready cake thing that's sweet. And it can be used as part of religious celebrations or for everyday eating. So I found that for as far as the religious celebrations go, it was offered to gods during ritual, so as an offering to Vesta, or I also found it offered to Bacchus specifically in another Ovid narrative, Fasti, and it was also commonly offered to household gods. Um, it's an religious offering that's associated with piety and humility, and a respect for tradition because it's not super expensive to make. It's just everyday things that you would have had in ancient Rome. It's literally just flour, eggs, and cheese. It's something that shows that you are principled and you want to give and you want to sacrifice, but maybe you don't have that much to give. Another interesting thing that I found is we actually have an official recipe from ancient Rome. This is Cato the Elder's recipe in De Agricultura. So this is kind of how we even have this recipe because he wrote down a recipe. Ovid talks about libum very specifically in Fasti, but this is the first time we see an actual recipe. And feel free to read it if you want. Okay, so getting into how this relates to Ovid. The rubric specifically says that there needs to be a direct mention or if it relates well to the themes. So we're going to go over both direct mentions and relation to the theme just because direct mention is a little bit foggy, even though it might be there. So in our translation, which is this bottom one, the Ian Johnston translation, says that in the story of Bacchus and Philemon, where Jupiter and Mercury come to Phrygia and are looking for a hospitable place to stay, Bacchus and Philemon offer them a huge feast, even though they're very poor. So in our translation, it says that they cooked a large piece of cheese and eggs that was gently cooked on cooling embers. And in another translation I found, the David Rayburn translation, it says cream cheese and eggs very lightly cooked on a moderate ashy heat. So obviously these translations do not specifically say libum, but to me, I think if you squint, if the cream cheese and eggs are cooked together, it's going to form, something similar to what libum would be, kind of a cheese and egg cake. So um, this is kind of the direct mention, but obviously, if you don't buy that, we also have direct themes that it links to. So now looking into a direct connection to the themes, and this is where I think Libum really does relate to Ovid well, because Ovid is very clear that sacrifice and humility and celebrating the gods is really important to being virtuous in ancient Rome. So I picked out a couple of stories where sacrifice and worship were really important themes. So first looking at the story with the Caledonian bear. This is where King Oeneus um, forgets to sacrifice to Diana, and because of that, Diana sends the Caledonian boar as a consequence. So, in this story, it's literally this guy didn't sacrifice and therefore he is going to get punished. And then the next story is about the daughters of Minias when they refused to go to a religious celebration, decided to weave and tell stories instead, and because of this, Bacchus turned them into bats and turns their looms into vines. So in both of these stories, it's very clear, or Ovid makes it very clear that sacrifice is very important to the gods, and if you aren't sacrificing, you will get punished. So I think that Libum being a um, sacrificially motivated meal relates to that theme very well. And then it also connects to the idea of giving a humble religious offering. So this is what we see in the story of Bacchus and Philemon because they are very poor, but they still give to the gods very virtuously and give everything they can. So with the Libum, this was a way to give something, sacrifice something to the gods that may have not been, cost much money. So these were all everyday foods that could be used to create a sacrificial offering. Okay, so now getting into the fun part of the cake. I turned off my camera because I wanted you guys to be able to see the cake. Um, but the ingredients are really simple. Just half a cup of flour, 3 eggs, 8 ounces of ricotta, which is just a soft cheese, half a cup of honey, bay leaves, orange zest, and lemon juice. A note on the ingredients. First, the bay leaves are, from what I found, what make it sacrificial in nature. Including bay leaves kind of gives it the more religious cake vibe versus just a sweet treat because bay leaves were sacred to Apollo and prophecy. Um, and then I included the orange zest and lemon juice because some of the reviews said that made it more tasty. And since I wanted people to actually be able to eat it, I included those. Um, the directions for making it are really simple, just 425 degrees, mix the wet ingredients, then the dry, and then cook for 35 to 40 minutes. Um, the batter tasted really good when I mixed it up, and I was pretty excited for the final cake, but there were some definite things that I would change, so let's move on to the final review. Okay, so moving on to the final product. Um, this is the cake. Some notes about the cake. First of all, you can see the little bay leaves. What I did was I put the bay leaves in at the bottom of the pan, and then I poured the batter on top of it. And so then when I took it out of the pan, I just flipped over the pan, so that's why they're on the top. Um, it seems kind of burnt. I'm not exactly sure why that happened. Maybe because I used like a dark springform pan instead of like maybe a glass pan. And I did put aluminum foil on the top to try and keep it from burning, but that didn't help much. Um, if, as you can see in this picture, I put some blueberries and raspberries on top. I wanted to make it look a little more appetizing because I cooked this as a dessert for Easter and I wanted people to be able to eat it. Um, Another thing is that it turned out a little thin. I kind of knew it was going to turn out thin based on the recipe I was using, but I was kind of curious to see if it would rise at all, and it didn't really. On the tasting, the batter was definitely much better than the actual cake, and I think that has to do with the bay leaves. I would not have added the bay leaves again. I think it makes sense that the bay leaves were only offered or added when they were offered as a sacrifice to the gods because it was not very good to eat with the bay leaves. So if I were to make this again, I would just nix the bay leaves, just make it a little like a cake. The only person who tried it was my grandma, and she said, or I tried it, and then my grandma tried it. My grandma said she liked it, and she ate the whole thing, so it must have been okay, but um, I would definitely make some changes before I made it again. So quickly noting my sources, I used ChatGPT to come up with ideas. Um, because we've been doing that all year. And then I used a few different recipes and the history that those recipes provided, plus I used a translation of Cato the Elder and another translation of Ovid. Lastly, I just want to say thank you for watching. I think that this cake was really fun to make and it was pretty traditional. And I hope this wasn't too hard to watch, and I hope you have a good summer.